In a city of nearly 15 million people, it's easy to feel completely alone. That's how 24-year-old Wei Zhang felt the day he moved out of his apartment in Tianjin. His lease was up, rent had gone up again, and the thought of dealing with another moody landlord and broken heater made his chest tighten. So instead of signing another year-long contract, he booked a room at a mid-range hotel just 2 blocks from his old place, just for a week, he told himself. But that week turned into a month. Then 2. And soon, hotel life started to feel less like a break and more like freedom. No cleaning, no repairs, no awkward landlord visits. But was it really that simple? Or was Wei running from something deeper? Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. Wei was like many young professionals in China's fast-growing cities, hardworking, quiet, and constantly trying to stretch every yuan. He worked remotely as a freelance developer, spending most days hunched over his laptop in a cramped studio apartment with flickering lights and unreliable plumbing. Meals were instant noodles or cheap takeout, and weekends disappeared in a blur of laundry, cleaning, and dodging the building's landlord, who always seemed to have another complaint or new fee. Wei didn't complain. This was life as most people knew it, practical, predictable, and exhausting. But under the surface, something was shifting. He started noticing how drained he felt at the end of each day, not from work, but from everything around it. Bills, noise, responsibilities he never asked for. One night, lying in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, he wondered, does life really have to be this difficult? It started with a broken water pipe. One morning in late October, Wei woke to the sound of dripping water, not from the faucet, but from the ceiling. A leak from the apartment above had soaked part of his bedding and left a dark, wet stain on the wall. He called the landlord, who shrugged it off, saying it'd take a few days to fix. Meanwhile, the smell of damp drywall filled the air. Out of frustration, Wei packed a small bag and checked into a modest hotel nearby, planning to stay just 2 nights. But something unexpected happened. The room was clean. The water pressure was perfect. Someone else made the bed. And for the first time in months, he felt rested. It was small, almost unnoticeable. But something inside him shifted, a quiet curiosity that whispered, what if this could be more than temporary? The 2 nights turned into 5. Then a full week. Wei kept telling himself he'd go back once the leak was fixed, but every time he thought of that cold apartment, the constant chores, the landlord's passive-aggressive texts, he felt a quiet resistance in his chest. At the hotel, his needs were simple and met without fuss. Towels replaced. Trash emptied. No arguing over utility bills. He still worked from his laptop, still ate quick meals, but there was a peace he hadn't known before. And the math started making sense too. Long-term hotel rates were comparable to rent once you included water, heating, Wi-Fi, and maintenance. It felt strange, even a bit indulgent, to admit he preferred this life. But a part of him worried, was he just escaping responsibility? Or had he finally found a version of adulthood that actually worked for him? One afternoon in the hotel lobby while waiting for a food delivery, Wei overheard a conversation between 2 young women at a nearby table. They were both in their 20s, laptops open, coffee cups half empty. One of them mentioned she'd been living in hotels for nearly 8 months. Cheaper than rent, she said. And no long-term strings. Curious, Wei leaned in and struck up a conversation. To his surprise, she wasn't alone. She pointed to an online group with thousands of members across China doing the same thing, rotating between hotels with monthly discounts, tracking deals, sharing tips. It wasn't just convenience, it was a growing trend. Wei spent the entire evening reading posts, guides, even stories like his own. That night, for the first time, he didn't feel strange or irresponsible. He felt part of something, a quiet shift in how people his age were choosing to live. As Wei dove deeper into this hotel living trend, he uncovered a less talked about side. While monthly rates were often competitive, the hotels weren't built for long-term residents. Many lacked proper kitchen facilities, forcing residents to rely on takeout. Privacy was limited, and the constant turnover of guests made it hard to build a real community. Worse, some hotels began raising prices or tightening rules as demand grew. Wei felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What began as freedom now felt fragile, a gamble on temporary comfort instead of a stable home. The more he learned, the more he worried about what might happen if this trend suddenly collapsed, leaving people like him with nowhere reliable to turn. A sense of responsibility grew. Was he ready to face the consequences of choosing this uncertain path? Just as Wei began to feel comfortable in his new routine, news spread that the hotel where he stayed planned to raise its monthly rates sharply. A move many feared was a direct response to the growing influx of long-term residents. Suddenly, what felt like freedom was slipping away. Wei faced a difficult choice. scramble to find a traditional apartment he could barely afford, or gamble on another hotel with no guarantee of stability. The landlord's cold calls from his old apartment added pressure, reminding him of the security and roots he'd abandoned. For the first time, the convenience of hotel living clashed with the harsh reality of uncertain shelter. Wei's heart pounded as he realized this wasn't just a lifestyle. It was a gamble. What would he choose? And what would happen if the gamble didn't pay off? Days before the rent hike took effect, Wei received an urgent notice. The hotel was selling the building. Residents had only 2 weeks to leave. Panic settled in like a heavy fog. With no lease, no permanent address, and barely enough savings, Wei felt the walls closing in. The temporary freedom he'd found now seemed like a trap with no way out. Yet, in the midst of this uncertainty, a small spark flickered. Through the online community he joined, other hotel residents shared advice, offered temporary rooms, and even started pooling resources. For the first time, Wei realized he wasn't alone. Maybe, just maybe, there was strength in this unconventional lifestyle, a chance to rebuild, not just survive. With the clock ticking, Wei leaned on the network he'd built online. Fellow hotel dwellers offered leads on affordable short-term rentals, and a local landlord willing to rent to someone with no long-term history. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, a stepping stone toward stability. More importantly, Wei learned to navigate this uncertain path with newfound confidence. The fear of losing everything hadn't vanished, but it no longer paralyzed him. Instead, he felt a quiet pride in carving out a life on his own terms, blending flexibility with responsibility. Wei's story was far from over, but he discovered that sometimes the hardest choices lead to unexpected strength. And in a world that's always changing, that might be the greatest freedom of all. Months later, Wei's life had settled into a new rhythm, a delicate balance between freedom and responsibility. He still moved frequently, choosing short-term stays in hotels and affordable rentals, embracing the flexibility his generation craved. Yet, the uncertainty remained a constant companion, a reminder that stability was never guaranteed. Wei often thought about the path he'd chosen, wondering if this trend was a solution or just a pause before a bigger challenge. For many young people like him, the idea of home was evolving, shaped by economic pressures and shifting values. So what about you? If faced with the choice between the comfort of a traditional home and the freedom of a hotel life, which would you choose? And what does home really mean to you?